adding audio to the visual mix. Our brains are hardwired to take in visual information and to notice difference. In an earlier presentation, we looked at how using the design principles of proximity, alignment, and contrast can help students master concepts more easily. Now we turn to a problem that plagues many content presentations: having too much text on a single screen when you are going to talk to an audience. Talking over a lot of text is a problem for learning because of a phenomenon called cognitive load. Cognitive load theory describes the mental energy needed to think about or process information. Attention to cognitive load is a critical concern for designers of instruction because our brains will generally take in visual information first and audio input second. So when there are words on a page, students will try to read that. And if you're talking at the same time, they probably won't hear what you're saying. See what happens to you in the next slide. Cognitive load theory describes the mental energy needed to think about or process information. Attention to cognitive load is a critical concern for designers of instruction, particularly when a learning context and its content are complex. Using narration along with printed words that directly mimic the narration creates split attention. It is much more efficient for the learner to hear words and see a corresponding image than to read words, hear the narration, and try to also, quote, read the narration at the same time. Cognitive overload happens in the face-to-face classroom as well. Professor of theater Alan Wade tells the story of a professor who put a detailed assignment up on a screen and then began talking. Halfway through his comments, the professor said that anyone who raised their hand would not have to do the assignment. Only about a third of the students raised their hand. The rest were still reading the assignment instructions. Simply put, it's difficult for us to read and listen at the same time. In addition to concerns about split attention between reading and listening, research shows that viewers have short attention spans for attending to important information. Online, this processing challenge is amplified because students are generally sitting alone in front of a computer screen, as you're doing now. Generally, students will pay attention to online lectures presented in segments that are no longer than 10 to maybe 15 minutes at a stretch, and even this can be long for certain types of information. The beauty of recording is that if you need more time, you can simply produce multiple segments. Post these recording files in listening order in an online course, and you have segments that students can listen to singly or as a group. Added benefits of short segments are that students can find and review content more easily, and the segments are easier for you to update. You have, in essence, a more modular content set which can be moved and adjusted as needed. For the design of these presentations, there are a set of best practices that can help reduce cognitive load and improve student learning. But first, decide whether you really need to present everything that you would normally talk about in a face-to-face classroom. Good presentations are a lot of work. Also, because of the challenges of holding student attention online, presentations are not always the best vehicle for conveying information. Perhaps you have a reading that will do just as well. Would it work to have a verbal explanation using audio without any visuals? Audio is easy to produce and is quite powerful, as radio broadcasts and audio books demonstrate. Also, resist the urge to use slides as notes, either for yourself or students. Note slides are generally text-heavy because they need to be read. You don't need them to organize a lecture online, as you might in the classroom, because you can create a narration script. For students, you can create notes in a Word file or PDF and post that along with the presentation file. So make sure you're not exacerbating cognitive overload by confusing slides for notes with slides for an online presentation. Of course, there will be many content elements you will want to present in your teaching of an online course, whether to elaborate, emphasize, maybe personalize some content, connect key concepts, or to demonstrate something. Now, I want to call your attention to the fact that narrating a presentation impacts how the content should be presented visually. Let's look how deciding to narrate a presentation changes what you put on the visual screen. As an example, take the information about eye brain processing presented here. We could narrate over the words on this slide. There isn't too much text on a page to create cognitive overload. We can even use visual design principles to add alignment and contrast. But what if we turn these slides into something more visual? This was made quickly in PowerPoint using the Smart Art feature. The differently sized and colored boxes are meant to underscore the memory process, as information goes from the smallest, lightest figure for lightning-fast sensory memory to the slightly darker and larger box for short-term memory, and finally to the largest and the darkest box for long-term memory. Or we can take this illustration, which is from a book by Stephen Few called Show Me the Numbers, which talks about how the brain processes work. We can now point out how the two processes, sensation and perception, represented by the large arrows at the top, relate to the physical and cognitive elements pictured below. We can explain and draw out concepts that would be hard for students to understand from readings or discussions alone, just as in a face-to-face lecture. And the cognitive load is lessened because we aren't just talking over text. In a GW example of this, economics professor Joseph Pelsman developed a graduate course on the digital economy for online delivery. One challenge, out of many, was how to make sure students understood the order and logistics systems for an online company, as represented by this diagram. Students could certainly read about the process in an article. However, Professor Pelsman believed most students would have difficulty grasping the full meaning of the process without some added explanation and elaboration. Therefore, as the following slide shows, adding narration was one way of letting Professor Pelsman explain the process. It's up to you how much of the next slide you listen to, but listen to enough to get a feel for how the narration adds to the content presentation. One of the best ways to get a feel for how different types of content can be presented visually, and then perhaps with audio, is to watch a lot of stuff. Watch it with an eye towards what grabs your attention in a presentation and when you find your mind wandering. Also, review tips for presentations included in our online resource. An issue that you will want to consider in preparing online presentations is accessibility for all students. All images should have alt or alternative text tags for all visuals, and presentations should provide captioning or a written transcript. See the accessibility section of this resource for details. In closing, when you decide what is important to talk to students about in an online course, think about how to take as many words as possible off the screen and into your audio script. Make sure you're not talking over so many words that you're creating cognitive overload for the viewer. Also, search out strong visuals and combine them with our PACT design principles of proximity, alignment, and contrast to create content presentations that engage your students.